Chapter 11. Cycles of Nature. Quote, from The Chemist's Key by Henry Nollius, 1617 A.D. If thou desire to see the secrets of nature, now open thine eyes. End quote. Following on from the previous chapter on yin-yang, we have the cycles of nature. I'm sure we can all agree that nature operates in cycles. We have days, months, years, which are all cycles. Then we have the water cycle, with water being evaporated by the sun, forming clouds, and then raining down again. It is these cycles that cause growth and development, most obviously in plant life, but also in all other forms of life, and the earth itself. Similar cycles also occur in larger systems, such as solar systems and the galaxies. All these cycles are due to the yin-yang principle, which I explained in the previous chapter. But have you stopped to think what the effect of these cycles is? I will illustrate it for you as simply as I can. Imagine you have a handful of damp soil, which you put into a closed system in which there is sun and then rain, as there is on Earth. Every day there is sunshine, yang, which evaporates off the water, which then condenses at night, yin, and rains back down onto the soil. What will happen? Well, the first and most obvious effect is that the soil will arrange itself in layers with the lightest particles at the top and the heaviest at the bottom. We have gravity to thank for this, of course. The hot air and water vapor will rise, and with it, the lightest of the particles, which attach themselves to the water. The lighter the particle is, the easier it attaches itself to the water, and the further the water will lift it while evaporating. This causes the heavier particles to sink as the lighter particles are picked up and placed back down on top of them. Everything will arrange itself in order of density. This you can already see by considering that the top layer of the earth is a soft soil, with heavier minerals as you dig down. This is also very easily proven with a little experiment, which is also the first part of our work in making the stone. The smallest and lightest particles of all will attach themselves to the water and not let go, since they are so volatile, and these particles are the life energy we are looking for. But something else happens too. With the particles continuously being moistened and then heated and dried, calcined, they will slowly break down, decompose, putrefy into smaller particles. So over time, you'll end up with more of the lighter particles, less dense, and less heavier particles, more dense. The particles will get lighter and lighter until they are broken down into what they are made of, the original life energy. The life energy itself is infused into the water and so penetrates all of the particles as they are moistened by the water. And the life energy also aids the putrefaction by encouraging the elements to break down into its own form. So, you can assume that eventually, after a very long time, the entire mass is converted into life energy, which is what we call the philosopher's stone. But I don't recommend using soil for this process, since it will take too long. Then there are life forms which use this life energy and the lightest particles to grow and live. Plants grow in the top, lightest layer of the soil and use the life energy which is more concentrated there for their development, which they collect and form into matter for their own use. Animals then eat the plants to absorb their life energy, and other animals eat those animals for the same reason. Once eaten, our stomachs digest what we eat into even smaller particles, which is just another process of putrefaction. Plants love to grow in dead plant matter, since this is already full of life energy, which is now happily decomposing into lighter particles and back into the wonderful life energy. I'll give you an illustration of how this works inside your body. When you eat an apple, you first chew it. The chewing is the first stage of decomposition. It breaks it down into smaller pieces. Then it goes into your stomach and is digested, dissolved by your stomach acid. This is again decomposition for breaking down the matter in order to extract and reuse the particles inside of it. What you get is a range of matter, sugars, proteins, vitamins, etc., and life energy. The most important of these is the life energy, but since we do not normally have enough of this, we use the determined and more dense particles, sugar, protein, etc., where we can, for the required needs of our body. The life energy can be made into anything we are lacking. It can be formed into any other particle required by our body. It can even be made into water if we have not had enough to drink, or oxygen if we are not breathing enough. This is why when you ingest the stone, you don't need to eat, drink, or breathe, because your body will make this into exactly what it needs. Scientists have found evidence of a biological transmutation already. In many incidents, it has been proven that animals can produce minerals that they have not ingested. This supports the existence of life energy. Quote, from Evidence That Atoms Behave Differently in Biological Systems by Madhavendra Puri. Crabs, shellfish, and crayfish have shells made largely of calcium. A crab 17 centimeters by 10 centimeters has a shell weighing around 350 grams. Periodically, these animals shed their shell and create a new one. This is called molting. When molting, a crab is very vulnerable and hides away from all other creatures, so it cannot get calcium by preying on other creatures. According to French chemist C. Louis Kervran of the Council d'Hygiene in Paris, seawater contains far too little calcium to account for the rapid production of a shell. The calcium content of seawater is about 0.042%, and a crab can form a new shell in little more than 1 day. If the entire body of a crab is analyzed for calcium, it is found to contain only enough calcium to produce 3% of the shell, even taking into account the calcium carbonate stored in the hepatopancreas just before molting. Even in water completely devoid of calcium, shellfish can still create their calcium-bearing shells, as shown by an experiment performed at the Maritime Laboratory of Roscoff. A crayfish was put in a seawater basin from which calcium carbonate had been removed by precipitation. The animal made its shell anyways. Kervran, 1972, page 58. Chemical analysis made on animals secreting their shells has revealed that calcium carbonate is formed on the outer side of a membrane, although on the opposite side of the membrane, where matter enters, there is no calcium. This fact has left specialists perplexed. Kervran, 1972, page 58. End quote. So you can see that the cycles of nature are in place to purify matter and break it down into lighter, freer particles and life energy in order to be used again to create new and better life forms. Life forms grow from these lighter, volatile particles, which they form into matter according to their own needs. And when they die, nature turns it back into the dust from whence it came. Quote, from The Crowning of Nature by Anonymous, 16th to 17th century. God being before all things, when he was alone, created one substance, which he called the first matter, and of that substance he created the elements, and from them created all things. Quote, from The Root of the World by Roger Bacon, 13th century. That part of the body which is dissolved ever ascends or rises to the top, above all the other undissolved matter which remains yet at bottom. Therefore, said Avicen, that which is spiritual in the vessel ascends up to the top of the matter, and that which is yet gross and thick remains in the bottom of the vessel. Quote, from The Glory of the World, or Table of Paradise, by Anonymous, 1526 AD. Observe, furthermore, how the seeds of all things that grow, as for instance grains of wheat or barley, spring forth from the ground by the operation of the stone, and the developing influences of sun and moon, how they grow up into the air, are gradually matured and bring forth fruit, which again must be sown in its own proper soil. The field is prepared for the grain, being well plowed up and manured with well-rotted dung, for the earth consumes and assimilates the manure, as the body assimilates its food, and separates the subtle from the gross. Therewith it calls forth the life of the seed and nourishes it with its own proper milk, as a mother nourishes her infant, and causes it to increase in size and to grow upward. The earth separates, I say, the good from the bad, and imparts it as nutriment to all growing things, for the destruction of one thing is the generation of another. It is the same in our art, where the liquid receives its proper nutriment from the earth. Hence the earth is the mother of all things that grow, and it must be manured, plowed, harrowed, and well prepared, in order that the corn may grow, and triumph over the tares, and not be choked by them. A grain of wheat is raised from the ground through the distillation of the moisture of the sun and moon, if it has been sown in its own proper earth. The sun and moon must also impel it to bring forth fruit, if it is to bring forth fruit at all. For the sun is the father, and the moon is the mother, of all things that grow. In the same way, in our soil, and out of our seed, our stone grows through the distilling of the sun and moon. And as it grows, it rises upwards, as it were, into the air, while its root remains in the ground. That which is above is even as that which is below. The same law prevails. There is no error or mistake. Again, as herbs grow upward, put forth glorious flowers and blossoms, and bear fruit, so our grain blossoms, matures its fruit, is threshed, sifted, purged of its chaff, and again put in the earth, which, however, must previously have been well manured, harrowed, and otherwise prepared. When it has been placed in its natural soil, and watered with rain and dew, the moisture of heaven, and roused into life by the warmth of the sun and moon, it produces fruit after its own kind. These two sowings are peculiar characteristics of our art, for the sun and moon are our grain, which we put into our soil as soul and spirit, and such as are the father and the mother will be the children that they generate. Thus, my sons, you know our stone, our earth, our grain, our meal, our ferment, our manure, our verdigris, our sun and moon. You understand our whole majesty, and may joyfully congratulate yourselves that you have at length risen above the level of those blind charlatans of whom I spoke. For this is unspeakable mercy. Let us render thanks and praise to the Creator of all things, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. As it is with plants, so it is with metals. While they lie in the heart of the earth, in their natural ore, they grow and are developed, day by day, through the influence of the four elements. Their fire is the splendor of the sun and moon. The earth conceives in her womb the splendor of the sun, and by it the seeds of the metals are well and equally warmed, just like the grain in the fields. Through this warmth there is produced in the earth a vapor or spirit, which rises upward and carries with it the most subtle elements. It might well be called a fifth element, for it is a quintessence, and contains the most volatile parts of all the elements. This vapor strives to float upward through the summit of the mountains, but, being covered with great rocks, they prevent it from doing so, for when it strikes against them, it is compelled to descend again. It is drawn up by the sun. It is forced down again by the rocks, and as it falls, the vapor is transmuted into a liquid, i.e., sulfur and mercury. Of each of these, a part is left behind, but that which is volatile rises and descends again, more and more of it remaining behind, and becoming fixed after each descent. This fixed substance is the metals, which cleave so firmly to the earth and the stones that they must be smelted out in a red-hot furnace. The grosser the stones and the earth of the mountains are, the less pure the metal will be. The more subtle the soil and stones are, the more subtle will be the vapor, and the sulfur and mercury formed by its condensation. And the purer these latter are, the purer, of course, will the metals themselves be. When the earth and the stones of the mountains are gross, the sulfur and mercury must partake of this grossness, and cannot attain their proper development. Hence arise the different metals, each after its own kind. For as each tree of the field has its own peculiar shape, appearance, and fruit, so each mountain bears its own particular ore. These stones and that earth being the soil in which the metals grow. Quote, Verbum Dismissum by Count Bernard Trevisan, 15th century. It is then expedient to understand the manner of this circulation, which verily is nothing else but to imbibe, refresh, or moisten the compound in due weight or proportion with our mercurial water, which philosophers command to be called permanent water, in which inhibitions the compound is digested and congealed to its natural accomplishment. As the infant in the mother's belly ought to be nourished with natural nourishment, which is menstrual blood, to the end it may be increased and grow in quantity and stronger in quality, so ought our stone to be nourished. Quote, from an explanation of the natural philosopher's tincture by Paracelsus, by Alexander von Suchten, 16th century. The steady warmth of the sun ripens every fruit, and the warmer the sun, yet not too dry and alternating with dew rains, the better do fruits mature and turn out. End quote. Chapter 12. Metallic Generation. The alchemists claim that metals and minerals all grow and develop, and so are life forms, along with plants and animals. Perhaps not life forms in the sense we normally use the phrase, but if we are to define a life form as something which grows and multiplies, then we must include metals and minerals in this category. The alchemists all agree that metals have the same seed, that is to say, that they are all of the same species. The different types of metals are just different stages of the same thing, of which gold is the final and complete development. To put it another way, we could say that the different, elementary metals are stable energy states, which a metal moves through in continued development. However, this development only continues whilst the metal is in its proper environment, which is inside the earth. Once taken out of the ground, a metal can only stay at the state in which we found it in. The stone gives any metal a sudden burst of energy, which will excel it to its preferred and most stable state, gold or silver with the less pure white stone. This is not a far-out notion. In fact, lead has already been transmuted to gold in a lab by firing radiation at it. Look it up if you don't believe me. Which is a similar but massively less efficient version of what the stone does. I will include some long quotes from the alchemical books concerning the development of metals and minerals below. This will be helpful to understand the development of metals and get an idea how nature works in regards to that. The alchemists wrote a lot about how metals and minerals are generated in the earth, which they do so as to indirectly teach the reader how to make the stone, since the stone is made using very similar natural processes. However, the alchemists here are talking in theory and from a time when geology had not been well studied. Geology has come a long way in the past few hundred years, but then again, the science of today does not recognize very obvious natural processes, preferring complicated theories of the scientists' own invention. I expect the truth to be somewhere in between these two extremes. Quote, from The New Pearl of Great Price by Peter Bonus, 1338 AD. The great process of development into silver and gold is constantly going on. This appears from the fact that miners often find solid pieces of pure silver in tin and lead mines, and also from the experience of others who have met with pure gold in metallic veins of iron, though this latter occurrence is more rarely observed on account of the great impurity of iron. In some silver mines, again, quantities of solid gold have been discovered, as, for instance, in Serbia. At first, the whole appears to be silver, but in the refiner's crucible, the gold is subsequently separated from the less precious metal. Thus, it is the teaching of experience that nature is continually at work changing other metals into gold, because though in a certain sense they are complete in themselves, they have not yet reached the highest perfection of which they are capable, and to which nature has destined them, just as the human embryo and the little children are complete and perfect as far as they go, but have not attained to their ultimate goal of manhood. Gold is found in different forms, either mixed with a coarse rocky substance or in a solid condition, or amongst the sand in the beds of rivers, being washed out of the mines by water. Golden sand is also found in the deserts of India, where there are no rivers. Silver is never found mixed with the sand of rivers, but mostly in the shape of ore in mines, or like a vein running through a rock. Lead and tin occur mostly in the shape of ore, and sometimes they are mingled with earth. The same facts have become commonly observed with regard to iron and the other metals. When different metals are discovered in the same mine, the less pure of the two will generally have a tendency to ascend and leave what remains more force to develop in the right direction. The substance of common metals is the same as that of gold. If, then, the form of gold, or the elixir, be added to them, they must become gold. As the common metals become gold and silver by means of a natural process, it is quite possible that the same result should be brought about by the means of the alchemist's art. Quote, from Compound of Compounds by Albertus Magnus, 13th century. The generation of metals is circular, that is, one passes easily from one to another following a circle, the cousin metals having similar properties. It is because of this that silver changes more readily into gold than any other metal. Quote, from a tract of great price concerning the philosophical stone, by a German sage, 1423 AD. Now, since nature is always striving to attain perfection, and to reach the goal set before her by the Creator of all things, she is continually at work upon the qualities of the four elements of each substance, and so stirs up and rouses the inward action of the elements by the accidental heat of the sun, and by natural warmth, that there arises a kind of vapor or steam in the veins of the earth. This vapor cannot make its way out, but is closed in penetrating through fat, earthy oil, and impure, sulfurous substances. It attracts to itself more or less of these foreign and external impurities. This is the reason that there are seen in so great a variety of colors before it attains to purity and its own proper color. Nature has to purge away the peculiar characteristics of all other metals before she can make gold, as you may see by the fact that different kinds of metals are found in the same metallic vein. If, however, this pure quicksilver floats upward in a pure mineral earth, without any gross alloy, it is hardened into the pure and white sulfur of nature by being subjected to a very moderate degree of gentle heat, and at length assumes the specific form of silver. Like all the other metals, it may still be developed into gold if it remained under the influence of its natural heat. But if the same pure unalloyed quicksilver be subjected to a higher degree of natural heat, it is transmuted into the pure red sulfur of nature, and becomes gold without first passing through the stage of silver. In this form it remains, because gold is the highest possible stage of metallic development. Those metals, indeed, which have been torn up by the roots, that is to say, that have been dug up from their own proper soil in the veins of the earth, can no longer proceed in that course of development which they pursued in their native abode. Yet as much in them lies, they strive to be perfected. The operation of nature is progressive, not retrogressive. Hence, it is a great mistake to suppose that the work of nature can be reversed by dissolution in aqua fortis, or by the amalgamation of gold and silver and quicksilver. For if the metal be plunged into a solvent, if water be distilled from it, or if quicksilver be sublimed from it, it still remains the same metal that it was before. The specific properties of a metal cannot be destroyed so as to obtain the first substance. The metals which we dig up out of the earth are, as it were, torn up by the roots, and their growth having come to a standstill, they can undergo no further development into gold, but must always retain their present form, unless something is done for them by our art. Hence we must begin at the point where nature had to leave off. We must purge away all impurity and the sulfurous alloy, as nature herself would have done if her operation had not been accidentally or violently disturbed. she would have matured the original substance and brought it to perfection by gentle heat, and in a longer or shorter period of time, she would have transmuted it into gold. In this work, nature is ceaselessly occupied while the metals are still in the earth. First, the earth, which was created rich, great, deep, wide, and broad, was, through the daily operation of the sun's rays, penetrated to her very center with a fervent, bubbling, vaporous heat. For the earth in herself is cold and saturated with the moisture of water. At length, the vapors which were formed in this way in the heart of the earth became so strong and powerful as to seek to force a way out into the open air, and thus, instead of affecting their object, threw up hills and hillocks, or as they were, bubbles on the face of the earth. And since in those places where mountains were formed, the heat of the sun must have been most powerful, and the earthy moisture rich and most plentiful, it is there we find the most precious metals. Where the earth remained plain, this steam did not succeed in raising up mountains. It escaped, and the earth, being deprived of its moisture, was hardened into rocks. Where the earth was poor, soft, and thin, it is now covered with sand and little stones, because it never had much moisture, and having been deprived of the little it possessed, has now become sandy and dry, and incapable of retaining moisture. No earth was changed into rocks that was not rich, viscous, and well saturated with moisture. For when the heat of the sun has sucked up its moisture, the richness of the earth still makes it cohere, although now it has become hard and dry, and earth that is not yet perfectly hard is even at the present time undergoing a change into hard stones, through the diligent working of nature. But the steam and the vapors that do not succeed in escaping remain enclosed in the mountains, and are day by day subjected to the maturing and transmuting influences of the sun and the planets. Quote, from The New Chemical Light by Michael Sindavogius, 17th century. All things are produced of a liquid air or a vapor, which the elements distill into the center of the earth by a continual motion, and that as soon as the Archias has received it, his wisdom sublimes it through the pores, and distributes it to each place, producing different things according to the diverse places in which it is deposited. Some think that each metal has its own seed, but this is a great mistake, for there is only one seed. The sperm which appears in Saturn is the same as that which is found in gold, silver, copper, etc., and their difference is caused by the place and the time during which nature was at work upon them, the procreation of silver being achieved sooner than that of gold, and so with the other metals. The vapor which is sublimed by heat from the center of the earth passes either through cold or warm places. If the place be warm and pure, and contain adhering to it a certain fatness of sulfur, the vapor, or mercury of the sages, joins itself to its fatness, and sublimes it together with itself. If in the course of its further sublimation, this unctuous vapor reaches other places where the earth has already been subtilized, purified, and rendered moist by previous ascending vapors, it fills the pores of this earth, and with it becomes gold. But if this unctuous moisture be carried to impure and cold places, it becomes lead. If the earth be pure and mingled with sulfur, it becomes copper. For the purer the place is, the more beautiful and perfect will the metal be. We must also note that the vapor is constantly ascending, and in its ascent from the earth's center to its superficies, it purifies the places through which it passes. Hence precious metals are found now where none existed 1,000 years ago. For this vapor, by its continual progress, ever subtilizes the crude and impure, and as continually carries away the pure with itself. This is the circulation and reiteration of nature. All places are being more and more purified, and the purer they become, the nobler are their products. The substance of stones is the same as that of all other things, and their quality is determined by the purity of the places in which they arise. When the four elements distill their vapor to the center of the earth, the Archeus of nature expels and sublimes it in such a manner that it carries with it in its passage through the pores of the earth all the impurities of these places up to the surface, where they are congealed by the air. All that pure air engenders being congealed by crude air, their ingression being mutual, so that they join one with another, since nature rejoices in nature. Thus rocks and stones are gradually built up and generated. Now the larger the pores of the earth, the greater is the quantity of impurities carried upward, and thus the earth is most completely purified under those places where there is a great accumulation of stones or rocks at the surface. And in this manner the procreation of metals becomes easier in these places. This explains the fact that metals are scarcely ever found in plains, but nearly always in the bowels of rocky hills. The plains are often moist with elemental water, which attracts to itself the rising vapor, and with it is digested by the rays of the sun into the rich clay which potters use. In places where the soil is gross, and the vapor contains neither unctuous nor sulfur, it produces herbs and grass in the meadows. The precious stones, such as diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, chrysoprase, onyx, and carbuncle, are all generated in the same manner as ordinary stones. When the natural vapor is sublimed by itself without sulfur or the unctuosity of which we have spoken, and reaches a place where there is pure salt water, i.e. in very cold places, where our sulfur cannot exist, for could it exist this effect would be hindered, diamonds are formed. The unctuous sulfur which rises with the vapor cannot move without warmth, and is instantly congealed when it reaches a slightly cold place, leaving the vapor to continue its upward movement without it. Quote from On the Philosopher's Stone by Anonymous, 12th to 17th century. All philosophers affirm, with one consent, that metals have a seed by which they are increased, and that this seminal quality is the same in all of them. End quote. Chapter 13. The Emerald Tablet. This chapter is dedicated to the Emerald Tablet, which is the only surviving genuine writing of Hermes, the founder of alchemy in this age. Hermes was called Mercury by the Romans, the messenger of the gods, and it is after Hermes that the word Mercury is used so commonly in alchemy. By the Egyptians, he was called Thoth, deity. Alchemy is also called the Hermetic art, after Hermes, and even today the term hermetically sealed can be used to describe an airtight seal, necessary in alchemy. Some believe Hermes was Noah of flood fame. Others believe he was Enoch. Regardless, Hermes was the person who carried the knowledge of the sacred sciences over the last big catastrophe to save it from destruction, which leans towards him being Noah. It was also Hermes who began the vow of secrecy, reserving alchemy only for a limited elite of the wise, but with the understanding that the secret will be released again at the end of the age. There are many legends surrounding the tablet. The name of the tablet itself comes from a legend of it being found written on a tablet made of emerald in the crypt of Hermes, though in reality it appears that the Emerald Tablet has been in continuous circulation, passing through the hands of the alchemists since the beginning. The Emerald Tablet itself is the central and most concise of alchemical texts, and it is also the most accurate, explaining the full theory, practice, and philosophy in just a few words. I will list 5 different translations of each line, including my own, and provide commentary. Line 1, Arabic translation. Line 2, Newton's translation. Line 3, Biedo's translation. Line 4, contemporary rendering of the Latin text. Line 5, author's translation, bold. It contains an accurate commentary that can't be doubted. 'Tis true without lying, certain most true. This is true and remote from all cover of falsehood. It is true without error, certain, and most true. A fundamental truth, without error, perfect, and complete. This line is informing us that what is being said is a fundamental truth, not only a relative truth. Relative truths can change, such as the sky is blue. It is not always true. Fundamental truths never change, are always true, and therefore can be applied on any level or in any situation. It states, "What is the above is from the below, and the below is from the above. The work of wonders is from one." That which is below is like that which is above. That which is above is like that which is below to do the miracles of one only thing. Whatever is below is similar to that which is above. Through this, the marvels of the work of one thing are procured and perfected. That which is below is as that which is above, and that which is above is as that which is below, to perform the miracles of the one thing. As above, so below, the lesser and greater. Microcosm and macrocosm, they are the same. Following this principle, all things were made from the one. There are two statements on this line. The first is telling us that every level follows the same fundamental principles. Things above us, macrocosms, planets, solar systems, galaxies, and things below us, microcosms, the philosopher's stone, atoms, etc., follow exactly the same principles. They may look different from our perspective, but they all operate in the same way. This is very important to understand. If you can grasp this fact, then you will start to see it everywhere. It is because of this that we know how to make the stone and why it works. On a different level, it also tells us that spirituality, philosophy, and the physical world again follow the same principles. If something is true spiritually, then it must also have a physical counterpart. There is nothing which applies to one and does not apply to the other. The second statement tells us that creation and perfection, purification, evolution, is caused by the previous statement. Things would not grow and evolve, both physically and spiritually, if it were not for the fact that each level is a mirror of all others. It tells us that this comes from one, in accordance with one. One is God. One is everything. One is nothing. One is the only thing whose existence is self-supported. The existence of everything else comes from this one, all following the same principles. One is the only thing that exists, whereas everything else is a distorted reflection of the one. And all things sprang from this essence, through a single projection. How marvelous is its work! It is the principal part of the world, and its custodian. And as all things have been arose from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. Also, as all things are made from one by the consideration of one, so all things were made from this one by conjunction. And as all things were from the one by means of the meditation of the one, thus all things were born from the one by means of adaptation. And as all things arose from a thought by the one, thus all things were formed as an adaptation of the one. This is the fundamental principle. Here we are told that all things, literally everything on every level, came from the one. It is important to also remember the previous line, that all principles apply to every level. Therefore, we know it holds true to both the spiritual and the physical. The biggest mistake of both modern science and spirituality is to assume that the two are separate. On a spiritual and philosophical level, it tells us that God created all things by adapting himself. God did not change himself, but each level below him is a distorted reflection of the level above. So all things are God by adaptation, It also says that it was the meditation or thought of God which began this. It implies a single thought. You can imagine this like a ripple on the surface of a flat lake. One single movement in stillness, emptiness, creates a series of ripples, each a reflection of the former. The ripples all follow exactly the same principle, but they become distorted as they get farther away from the source. Each ripple creates the next ripple as a slightly more distorted reflection of itself. On a physical level, it tells us that everything is actually made up of the same stuff. It is interesting to note here that we have discovered this with science. Everything is made of energy. But it is not entirely obvious just by looking around you, because the physical follows the same principles as the higher existences. We must accept the existence of a physical substance, particle, which is the root of what everything is made out of. We can't just call it energy and be happy that it is only a concept. It must be physical. All spiritual things have a physical counterpart, and vice versa. This thing is the life energy I have been talking about. So this line is also telling us about the life energy, and how everything in the physical world is made from life energy by adaptation. Its father is the sun, and its mother is the moon. Thus the wind bore it within it, and the earth nourished it. The sun is its father, the moon its mother. The wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth its nurse. The father of it is the sun, the mother the moon. The wind bore it in the womb. Its nurse is the earth, the mother of all perfection. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. The wind carried it in its belly. The nurse is the earth. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. It is carried by the wind, it is nursed by the earth. Firstly, we have reference to the sun and the moon. This is clearly symbolism for the polarity of yin, moon, and yang, sun. However, you should consider that the sun and moon are more important than just symbols of polarity. There is a reason why we have one sun and one moon from our perspective on Earth. It is not just chance, as science might make you believe. Again, yin-yang is a fundamental principle and therefore applies on all levels, including in this physical reality. Therefore, the moon and sun are literally physical counterparts of the yin-yang principle. It is interesting to note how the sun and moon appear to be exactly the same size when looking up at them from Earth. This is a big coincidence, if it is only a coincidence. It means that the sizes and distances of the sun and moon are in perfect harmony with each other, which could be one of the major factors which has made the conditions optimum for life on Earth in this physical plane and at this time. The sun and moon also symbolize they are literal counterparts of fire and water from the level above. Polarity again, and we're moving towards more physical symbolism, closer to our own level. These again are counterparts of the two substances from which we make the stone, now on a microcosmic level, which come themselves from one single ingredient. I hope you can see how in this manner the theory and practice of making the stone applies on all levels, from the very physical and chemical level to the philosophical and macrocosmic spiritual level. The wind is the carrier and the distributor. It is easier to explain this to you from a one-up macrocosmic perspective, one level above us, the level of the Earth. On the Earth, we have the water cycle, where the water is evaporated and forms clouds. The clouds then rain back down onto Earth. Without this, life could not exist, because it is necessary to grow plants, which animals need to eat, or animals eat other animals who eat plants. But there is an important and often overlooked factor. Without the wind, all the water would just go up, and then come back down in the same place. This means there would be no water on the land, as it would only rain on the sea, since water on land eventually runs into the sea. In which case, there would be no life on land, and we humans would not exist. So we have wind to thank for our existence. The wind is absolutely necessary for the natural distribution of things, water, seeds, etc. This also applies to making the stone. Without the movement of the water vapor, caused by heat and cold, the process would not work. The formation of the stone is a reflection of the operation of the earth, and all other levels too. This is what I mean when I say that we must follow the guidance of nature. Just as the earth is the nurse for plants, they grow from it and are supported by it. In the same way, the earth supports and cares for us humans. In the same way, the earth is the matter which allows us to capture and contain, in a way tame, the life energy in order to make the stone. The earth is never the active force. It is a passive, feminine, yin force. It is the matrix. Earth does not actively do anything. It only supports and nurses those that depend upon it, protecting them and lifting them up. So, Earth is truly the nurse of all things. In this physical world, the Earth is solid matter, but it has counterparts on the other levels too. Together we have fire, sun, water, moon, wind, and earth. These are the four elements. Everything is made through the actions of these four elements as they act on and move between one another. In the same way, the yin and yang are always pulling back and forth. The ancients did not literally believe that everything was made of these four elements, in the sense that everything is made of H2O, mud and air, as history books might tell you. These are the states of matter. Earth, water, and wind are solid, liquid and gas, and fire is heat. So it is actually saying that everything is made of solid, liquid, gas, and heat. These are the states of matter on our physical level, with counterparts on other levels. Father of talismans and keeper of wonders, perfect in power that reveals the lights. The Father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force or power is entire if it be converted into earth. Its power is perfected if it is turned into earth. Its power is whole if it has been turned into earth. Its power is complete if it can be turned into earth. Here we are told that it can be perfected if it's turned into earth. This is written on physical terms, saying that if we can turn the four elements into earth, which is the element of the physical level we are in, then we will perfect it. It means the power, which I call life energy. So, if we can convert the life energy into a physical form, into earth, then we have perfected it on this level. Again, if we can turn the energy from the four elements into earth, then we will have converted and perfected the energy for use on this here physical level. It must be turned into earth if we are to use it on this level, since for a physical world we need a physical stone, which is the counterpart, reflection, of the one on this level. So you can see how the Philosopher's Stone is the physical manifestation of the power of God. It is a fire that became our earth. Separate the earth from the fire, and you shall adhere more to that which is subtle than that which is coarse, through care and wisdom. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle and thin from the crude and coarse, prudently, with modesty and wisdom. You will separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the dense, sweetly, with great skill. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the dense, the light from the heavy, with care and wisdom. These are direct instructions on how to actually make the stone, which of course is the same way that all things are perfected on all levels, with great care and wisdom. The wisdom is required to work out the method. You must separate the lighter particles from the denser particles. This is literally how you make the stone, as you can see in the practical instructions, particularly the first part of the great work. I will also interpret this from a spiritual perspective, just for you to see how it applies on every level. Realize which of your desires are promoting freedom and which are promoting restriction. Then separate the free from the restrictive. Focus on the free and positive desires, positive energy, good intention, and they will grow and expand, converting the remaining negative thoughts, negative energy, bad intention into their own free, light, and positive form. I hope you can see how the same fundamental principles apply to every level, and how the stone is a real and physically obtainable substance which follows the exact same principles. It ascends from the earth to the heaven. It extracts the lights from the heights and descends to the earth, containing the power of the above and the below, for it is with the light of the lights. It ascends from the earth to the heaven. Again, it descends to the earth and receives the force of things superior and inferior. This ascends from the earth into the sky, and again descends from the sky to the earth, and receives the power and efficacy of things above and of things below. It ascends from earth into heaven, and again it descends to the earth, and receives the power of higher and of lower things. It repeatedly ascends from earth to heaven, and then descends from heaven to earth, thus receiving power from both the high and the low. Again, direct instructions for making the stone, now focusing on the second part of the practical operations. The stone is repeatedly evaporated, ascends, and condensed, descends. From this, it becomes more purified and gains power, more life energy. The repeated change of state between solid, liquid, and gas allows the substance to become pure, and it increases the amount of life energy. From a spiritual perspective, you could say that our moving between the astral and physical planes, repeatedly dying and being born again, is an example of us perfecting ourselves, following the same principles. Therefore, the darkness flees from it. By this means ye shall have the glory of the whole world, thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. By this means you will acquire the glory of the whole world, and so you will drive away all shadows and blindness. Thus you will have the glory of the whole world, therefore will all obscurity flee from you. Then you will have the glory of the whole world, all ignorance will flee from you. This is saying, firstly, that you will have the glory of the whole world, which is the highest honor in the physical world, the philosopher's stone, which is the physical counterpart of the power of God. Secondly, all obscurity or ignorance will flee from you. This applies, of course, on every level. It means that you will now understand so much about the workings of nature, and no longer be ignorant, and new knowledge will come to you easily. It will be easy for you to see the truth from the lies. It also means, from the physical standpoint of making the stone, that once past a certain point of purity, the stone will very quickly be able to become more pure. Once it gets past a tipping point, the stone will convert impurity into its own pure form, as opposed to being diluted or corrupted by any dense or impure particles, exponential development. The greatest power overcomes everything that is subtle, and it penetrates all that is coarse. Its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. For this, by its fortitude, snatches the palm from all other fortitude and power, for it is able to penetrate and subdue everything subtle and everything crude and hard. Of all strength, this is true strength, because it will conquer all that is subtle and penetrate all that is solid. It is true force and the most powerful, for it conquers all subtle things and penetrates all solid things. The stone will convert all subtle and undetermined things into its own form, and for solid, determined things, it will penetrate them and bring them towards their true perfection. This is why it will protect a life form from decay, and it will turn any metal into gold. It penetrates all things and encourages them to reach their full potential. Again, it is the manifestation of the power of God in a physical form. Line not present in Arabic translation. So was the world created. By this means the world was founded. Thus was the world created. This is how the world was made. The world was made following these exact same principles, as were all worlds, planes, universes, and realities. The formation of the microcosm is in accordance with the formation of the macrocosm. From this are and do come admirable adaptations, whereof the means or process is here in this. And hence the marvelous conjunctions of it and admirable effects, since this is the way by which these marvels may be brought about. From this were wonderful adaptations, of which this is the means. Each level is a reflection of the one above. The microcosm is in accordance with the macrocosm. Now you know how all things are made through adaptation from the one. All things, all matter, all worlds, all frequencies, all universes, all planes are adaptations of the same thing, following the same principles. It starts with the one, and from there each level is a distorted reflection, an adaptation of the same thing, each level being a reflection of the level above. This is how all things are made. This is why the physical world exists. This is what it is. This is what all things are. The scholars made this their path. This is why thrice Hermes was exalted with wisdom. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegist, having the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. And because of this, they have called me Hermes Trismegistus, since I have the three parts of the wisdom and philosophy of the whole universe. Therefore am I named thrice great Hermes, having the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. This is the path of knowledge. Hence I am Hermes, thrice great, having three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. Alchemy is the path of knowledge, one of the more difficult paths to enlightenment, reserved for the wise and intellectual. Traditionally that was so, but now is the time of alchemy. Hermes is thrice great, 3 times great, because he was the custodian of the 3 sacred sciences: alchemy, astrology, and geometry. The 3 sacred sciences are all related to each other, of course, since like everything else, they follow the same principles. This is his last book that he hid in the catacomb. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended. My speech is finished, which I have spoken concerning the solar work. It is finished, what I have said about the working of the sun. I have said all that is needed concerning the operation of the sun. According to Hermes, this should be all that is necessary to fully understand. That is, assuming you already have a good understanding of philosophical principles. I hope that my commentary has helped you to understand the Emerald Tablet and see the truth of alchemy. It is the operation of the sun because the sun is a level above us and a symbol for the stone. The same principles apply on every level. Quote from the Emerald Tablet by Hermes, translated by author. A fundamental truth, without error, perfect and complete. As above, so below, the lesser and greater, microcosm and macrocosm, they are the same. Following this principle, all things were made from the One. And as all things arose from a thought by the One, thus all things were formed as an adaptation of the One. This is the fundamental principle. Its father is the sun. Its mother is the moon. It is carried by wind. It is nursed by earth. Its power is complete if it can be turned into earth. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the dense, the light from the heavy, with care and wisdom. It repeatedly ascends from earth to heaven, and then descends from heaven to earth, thus receiving power from both the high and the low. Then you'll have the glory of the whole world. All ignorance will flee from you. It is true force and the most powerful, for it conquers all subtle things and penetrates all solid things. This is how the world was made. Each level is a reflection of the one above. The microcosm is in accordance with the macrocosm. Now you know how all things are made through adaptation from the One. This is the path of knowledge. Hence I am Hermes, thrice great, having 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. I have said all that is needed concerning the operation of the sun. End quote. Chapter 14. What is it made from? The stone is made out of only one ingredient. Quote from the Glory of the World, or Table of Paradise, by Anonymous, 1526 AD. Know also that there is only one thing in the whole world that enters into the composition of the stone, and that, therefore, all coagulation and admixture of different ingredients would shew you to be on a wrong scent altogether. Quote from the New Pearl of Great Price, by Peter Bonus, 1338 AD. From the one substance is evolved, first the white and then the red tincture. There is one vessel, one goal, and one method. End quote. Not only is there nothing else used than this one ingredient, but you must be careful not to accidentally allow any other matter to become mixed with it. A small amount of dust or water would not ruin the work completely, but will certainly increase the time it takes to make it. Quote from The Root of the World, by Roger Bacon, 13th century. For the pure substance is of one simple essence, void of all heterogeneity. But that which is impure and unclean consists of heterogene parts, is not simple, but compounded, to wit of pure and impure, and apt to putrefy and corrupt. Therefore let nothing enter your composition which is alien or foreign to the matter, as all impurity is, for nothing goes to the composition of our stone, that proceedeth not from it neither in part nor in whole. If any strange or foreign thing be mixed with it, it is immediately corrupted, and by that corruption your work becomes frustrated. End quote. The ingredient is urine. I understand this may sound strange and suspiciously convenient on first hearing. However, there is sound and logical reasoning for the stone to be made from urine. Firstly, I must explain that the stone could in theory be made from anything, since everything contains the life energy to some degree, which is the active ingredient of the stone. Urine contains this life energy in high concentration, due to the fact that it has just come out of you, and you, as a living animal, are full of life energy. Quote, from Book of the Chemical Art by Marsilius Ficinus, 15th century. The stone also is in everything that is. Nature is in everything. And because nature has in itself all names, and nature is all the world, therefore the stone has many names, and is said to be in everything, although one is nearer than another. Quote, from On the Philosopher's Stone by Anonymous, 12th to 17th century. Let it be supposed, for an illustration of this subject, that anyone would propose to make malt. He may effect his purpose in the other grains, but barley is generally chosen, because its germ is made to sprout by a less tedious process, which is to all intents and purposes what we want in the extraction of our mercury. End quote. From the urine, we will need to extract a distillate, water, and a salt. The life energy is in the water, and since the life energy is so volatile, it will remain with the water even when the water is distilled, evaporated, and condensed. Our bodies do not want to reject the life energy in the urine, but have no choice since the life energy is attached to the water. Secondly, urine is the perfect ingredient because it is as of yet undetermined. That is, it has been well filtered, broken down, and purified. It contains all kinds of different minerals, but in minute particles not yet assigned to any purpose. Quote, from Aphorisms of Eubigerus by Barrow Eubigerus, 1690 AD. Our true and real matter is only a vapor, impregnated with the metallic seed, yet undetermined. End quote. Following the cycles of nature, we can separate the dense and light particles. The lightest particles are a salt. It does not matter what the actual minerals are in the urine. We just want whatever is the lightest and most volatile, which will be in the form of a salt. It is necessary that our stone has a body. It cannot be made with water alone. This salt is the perfect body because it will absorb the water and is itself most volatile, but still in a solid form. Also, since the salt is newly formed, it is not yet stable and determined, and will therefore easily break down, which is what we need it to do. I hope you see the requirements for our substance. We are looking only for water containing an abundance of life energy, and also very light matter which is ready to absorb the water and break down. There is nothing special or magical about urine. It is just that urine is already pure and pre-filtered by our bodies, and it meets all the qualifications we are looking for. Other substances could be used, but urine has been found to be the most efficient by the alchemists, many of whom experimented with many different substances. The best urine to use is that of a dark yellow color, since this means there is less water and more body, which is useful in the first part of the work. Therefore, the best time to collect the urine to be used for making the stone is the first time you urinate in the morning. This fact has become an open secret, as you can see from the society so named Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, who managed to figure out the true ingredient for the Philosopher's Stone, but unfortunately thought that this itself was a metaphor. So, to recap, the only ingredient of the Philosopher's Stone is urine, preferably obtained in the morning. You'll need around 1 liter. Following are some nice riddles from various alchemical books showing that the ingredient is urine. Quote from the Golden Tract concerning the Stone of the Philosophers by an anonymous German philosopher, 16th to 17th century. This matter lies before the eyes of all. Everybody sees it, touches it, loves it, but knows it not. It is glorious and vile, precious and of small account, and is found everywhere. Quote from the Fount of Chemical Truth by Irenaeus Philalethes, 1694 AD. Know that our Mercury is before the eyes of all men, though it is known to few. When it is prepared, its splendor is most admirable, but the sight is vouchsafed to none, save the sons of knowledge. Do not despise it, therefore, when you see it in sordid guise, for if you do, you will never accomplish our majesty. And if you can change its countenance, the transformation will be glorious. For our water is a most pure virgin, and is loved of many, but meets all her wooers in foul garments, in order that she may be able to distinguish the worthy from the unworthy. Quote from Verbum Dismissum by Count Bernard Trevisan, 15th century. When you shall be acquainted with the causes of this disposition, you will admire that a matter so corrupt should contain in itself such a heavenly-like nature. Quote from the Sulphic Hydrolith, or Waterstone of the Wise, by Anonymous, 17th century. By the ignorant and the beginner, it is thought to be the vilest and meanest of things. It is sought by many sages, and found by few. Men have it before their eyes, handle it with their hands, yet know it not, though they constantly tread it under their feet. The matter is very common, and may be everywhere obtained in abundance. Quote from The New Chemical Light by Michael Sindavogius, 17th century. Our substance is openly displayed before the eyes of all, and yet is not known. Our water that does not wet the hands. Quote from a magnificent and select tract on philosophical water by Anonymous, 13th to 17th century. There is something which everyone recognizes, and whoever does not recognize it will rarely, perhaps never, find it. The wise man will keep it, and the fool will throw it away, and the reduction comes easily to the man who knows it. Quote from 3 alchemical poems by Chang Po Tong, 11th century, Chinese. The wonderful Tao exists not far away from your own body. It is not necessarily found in the high mountains or in unknown waters. Quote from The Glory of the World, or Table of Paradise, by Anonymous, 1526 AD. There is only one spring in all the world from which this water may be obtained. It issues in a secret place, and its waters flow over all the world. It is familiar to all, yet none knows the principle, reason, or way to find the spring. For this reason, that sage might well exclaim, "O water of a harsh and bitter taste!" For, in truth, the spring is difficult to find, but he who knows it may reach it easily without any expense, labor, or trouble. The water is, of its own nature, harsh and bitter, so that no one can partake of it. And because it is of little use to the majority of mankind, the sage doth also exclaim, "O water, that art lightly esteemed by the vulgar, who do not perceive thy great virtues, in thee lie, as it were, hid the 4 elements. Thou hast power to dissolve and conserve, and join nature, such as is possessed by no other thing upon earth." It is called rebis, 2 thing, is a stone, salt, one body, and, to the majority of mankind, a vile and despised thing. Our matter is one of the commonest things upon earth, and contains within itself the 4 elements. It is, indeed, nothing short of marvelous that so many seek so ordinary a thing, and yet are unable to find it. The 2 are really only one very limpid water, which is so bitter as to be quite undrinkable. The quantity of this water is so great that it flows over the whole earth, yet leads to nothing but the knowledge of this art. The same also is misused too often by those who desire it. Take also the fire, and in it you will find the stone, and nowhere else in the whole world. It is familiar to all men, both young and old. is found in the country, in the village, in the town, in all things created by God, yet it is despised by all. Rich and poor handle it every day. It is cast into the street by servant maids. Children play with it, yet no one prizes it, though next to the human soul it is the most beautiful and the most precious thing upon earth, and has power to pull down kings and princes. Nevertheless, it is esteemed the vilest and meanest of earthly things. It is cast away and rejected by all. For the stone is prepared out of nothing in the whole world except this substance, which is essentially one. He who is unacquainted therewith can never attain the art. It is that one thing which is not dug up from mines, or from the caverns of the earth, like gold, silver, sulfur, salt, etc., but is found in the form which God originally imparted to it. It is formed and manifested by an excessive thickening of air. As soon as it leaves its body, it is clearly seen, but it vanishes without a trace as soon as it touches the earth, and, as it is never seen again, it must therefore be caught while it is still in the air. For no one would dream of buying the true matter at the apothecary's, nay, that tradesmen daily cast it into the street as worthless refuse. XXXVII, Pythagoras, in his fourth table says, "How wonderful is the agreement of sages in the midst of difference. They all say that they have prepared the stone out of a substance which by the vulgar is looked upon as the vilest thing on earth. Indeed, if we were to tell the vulgar herd the ordinary name of our substance, they would look upon our assertion as a daring falsehood. But if they were acquainted with its virtue and efficacy, they would not despise that which is, in reality, the most precious thing in the world. God has concealed this mystery from the foolish, the ignorant, the wicked, and the scornful, in order that they may not use it for evil purposes. The stone is mystic or secret because it is found in a secret place, in a universally despised substance where no one looks for the greatest treasure of the world. Hence, it may well be called the hidden stone." End quote. Chapter 15. The Time. It's difficult to determine exactly how long it will take to make the stone, since this depends upon many factors. The main factors which affect the time are: 1. How well you distill and purify the substance in the first part. 2. How accurate is the degree of heat. 3. The ambient room temperature. 4. The size and shape of your vessel, flask. 5. The quantity of the substance. There are also other less important factors, such as air pressure and astrological implications, but these are outside of your control, and so not worth worrying about. Quote from an explanation of the natural philosopher's tincture, or Paracelsus, by Alexander von Suchten, 16th century. Compare Oral, Augural, Book 3. Ye scarcely will anyone so exactly compute the years, as not either to diminish or add to their number. For suitable material will sometimes accelerate the process, and unsuitable retard the same. Or intense heat will by a little exceed the measure, but water by much. And time and place will vary. End quote. However, an average amount of time for the whole process is 3 years. You could possibly get this down to 18 months if you take more effort in the first part and have all the factors under strict control. Also, it could easily take 5 or even 8 years if the conditions are not so good. It takes a long time to make the stone, but the work is not hard, nor does it require much effort. For the most part, you simply need to check on the progress whenever you like, or at least every couple of weeks. Therefore, even a very busy person can find time to make the stone. The time is long, but the work is easy. The alchemical books are very obscure with the time. They do it on purpose to test the patience and dedication of the beginner. It works. Most people have no idea it takes years to make the stone, and so eventually give up, even if they were on the right track. Some of the alchemical book directly lie about how long it takes. But, as a rough guide, you can assume they mean a year when they say a month when they say a week, and a week when they say a day. Quote, from The New Pearl of Great Price, by Peter Bonus, 1338 A.D. The proper duration of our magistry, and the day and hour of its nativity and generation, are also shrouded in obscurity. Its conception, indeed, takes place in a single moment. Here we are to notice the conjunction of the purified elements and the germ of the whole matter. But if we do not know this, we know nothing of the entire magistry. There are certain signs which occur with great regularity, at their own proper times and seasons, in the development of this stone. But if we do not understand what they are, we are as hopelessly in the dark as before. The same remark applies to the exact proportions in which the different elements enter into its composition. The time required for the whole operation is stated by Rhasis to be 1 year. Rosinus fixes it at 9 months, others at 7, others at 40, and yet others at 80 days. I knew a man, says Gregory, who began the work in the right way, and achieved the white tincture. But when there was some delay about the appearance of the red color, he gave up in despair, etc. This man knew the simple elements of our art, their purification, commixtion, and the different signs which were to appear. He was ignorant only of the day and hour in which the conjunction of the simple elements and the completion of the work might be expected. And because he did not know what to do at the right time, the whole magistry vanished from his sight. For the white stone was not yet fixed, and, being exposed to too much heat, it evaporated. Quote, from A Golden and Blessed Casket of Nature's Marvels, by Benedictus Figulus, 1607 A.D. The wise reduce years to months, months to weeks, weeks to days. End quote. You should certainly try to optimize the heat and other factors in order to make the stone sooner. However, you should not rush the stone. You can't rush nature. If you want to accelerate nature, you have to play by its rules. It won't play by yours. Quote, from the Epistle of Bonus of Ferrara, by Peter Bonus, 14th century. Bear in mind that the chief error in this art is haste. Quote, from A Brief Guide to the Celestial Ruby, by Irenaeus Philalethes, 1694 A.D. You must not yield to despondency, or attempt to hasten the chemical process of dissolution. For if you do so by means of violent heat, the substance will be prematurely parched up into a red powder, and the active vital principle in it will become passive, being knocked on the head, as it were, with a hammer. Patience is, therefore, the great cardinal virtue in alchemy. Quote, from the 12 Keys, by Basilius Valentinus, 15th century. You must exercise considerable patience in preparing our elixir, if it is to become all that you wish it to become. No fruit can grow from a flower that has been plucked before the time. He who is in too great of a hurry can bring nothing to perfection, but is almost sure to spoil that which he has in hand. Quote, from the Chemical Treatise, or the Arsenal of Alchemy, by Thomas Norton, 1477 A.D. The greater haste we make, the less will be our speed. End quote. Chapter 16. The Heat. Most of the work in making the stone consists of optimizing the heat to be the perfect temperature. The degree of heat must be under strict control. Too much, and you will destroy the work. Too little, and it will not develop. Quote from A Brief Guide to the Celestial Ruby by Uranius Philalethes, 1694 AD. The external fire of the furnace should be neither too violent, in order that the equilibrium of chemical forces in the substance may not be disturbed, nor yet too gentle, so that the action of the inward fire may not languish for want of outward heat. It should be just such as to keep up an equable vital warmth. Quote from The Root of the World by Roger Bacon, 13th century. The happy prosecution of the whole work consists in the exact temperament of the fire. Therefore, beware of too much heat, lest you come to solution before the time, viz., before the matter is ripe, for that will bring you to despair of attaining the end of your hopes. Close up well thy vessel, and pursue to the end, for there is no generation of things but by putrefaction, by keeping out the air, and a continual internal motion, with an equal and gentle heat. End quote. In the first part of the work, and the very last part, you will be using high heat. A high degree of heat is called by the alchemists a dry heat, because it causes all the moisture to be evaporated. However, the majority of the work requires a moist heat, which means that the body is never dried out completely, and the moisture is circulating. A moist heat evaporates off most, but not all, of the moisture, then allows it to condense and rain back down onto the body, in an imitation of the nature's water cycle. The exact degree of heat required is, like the time it takes, difficult to state as an absolute, since it is relative and depends on your matter and vessel. The trick is to adjust the heat so that the moisture circulates, evaporates, and condenses as efficiently as possible. Quote from The Glory of the World, or Table of Paradise, by Anonymous, 1526 AD. The water or fire, being subtle, ascends, while the body is hard and remains where it is. The separation must be accomplished by gentle heat, i.e., in the temperature bath of the sages, which acts slowly and is neither too hot nor too cold. Then the stone ascends to heaven, and again descends from heaven to earth. The spirit and body are first separated, then again joined together by gentle coction, of a temperature resembling that with which a hen hatches her eggs. Quote from The Root of the World by Roger Bacon, 13th century. This then is the thing, that the vessel with the medicine be put into a moist fire, to wit, that the middle or one half of the vessel be in a moist fire, or balneo, of equal heat with horse dung, and the other half out of the fire, that you may daily look into it. End quote. In the beginning of the second part, the degree of heat required will likely be equal to or slightly above body temperature, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius. The heat will need to be increased as stone develops to the black, white, and red stages. Common sense should be able to inform you of the degree of heat required. It should be a comforting degree of heat, not an aggressive degree of heat, and it should support the circulation of the moisture. Quote from The Root of the World by Roger Bacon, 13th century. Therefore saith Rhasis, be very diligent and careful in the sublimation and liquefaction of the matter, that you increase not your fire too much, whereby the water may ascend to the highest part of the vessel. For then, wanting a place of refrigeration, it will stick fast there, whereby the sulfur of the elements will not be perfected. For indeed, in this work, it is necessary that they be many times elevated, or sublimed, and depressed again, and the gentle or temperate fire is that only which completes the mixture, makes thick, and perfects the work." End quote. Chapter 17. Different Methods. As you may have guessed, there is not only one possible method or one possible ingredient in the world for the making of the stone. There are several ways to get to the same place. As long as you are following the rules of nature, you will get the stone by whatever method you use. Some methods will be more efficient, quicker than others. Quote from the book concerning the tincture of the philosophers by Theophrastus Paracelsus, 16th century. Many ways have been sought to the tincture of the philosophers, which finally all came to the same scope and end. Quote from Book of the Chemical Art by Marsilius Ficinus, 15th century. For the making whereof several operations have been invented by several philosophers, that might be completed by art which was left by nature, since nature herself is always inclined toward her own perfection. End quote. The method I am presenting in this book is, I'm sure, not the most efficient method possible, but it is the method I know, and is a tried and tested method, developed over thousands of years by some of the greatest minds. It is the first part of the work which is most open to alternative methods. The ingredient you choose, which for us is urine, could be something else. If you could find something more pure with the right qualities, there may also be a more efficient method of processing the ingredient than the one I will give in the following chapters. Quote from The New Pearl of Great Price by Peter Bonus, 1338 AD. The second difficulty consists in the apparent disagreement of those who profess to exercise our art at the present day. Amongst those persons are observed a great diversity of method, and a considerable variety even in the choice of their substance. It appears indeed as if there were many roads to our art, and not one only. Gibber avers that there are many ways to produce one effect. The same opinion is expressed by Rhasis in his book on the perfect magistry, where he speaks of bodies and spirits, and their purification and diverse and manifold composition. End quote. In order to predict other substances which could be used as our ingredient, we must consider the laws and cycles of nature. A good understanding of nature and alchemy, understanding how and why the process works, will enable you to also guess at other substances which could be used. It makes sense to me that urine is most efficient for the extraction of the body, salt, and also contains much life energy in its water. However, it would make logical sense that semen, blood, and fresh fruit juice also contain a high concentration of life energy, which is the active principle. Perhaps more than urine, or perhaps not. I have not experimented with these, as, in my experience, it takes so long to experiment that it would be quicker to just make the stone the traditional way. We can certainly be sure that the alchemists tried different substances and experiments themselves, and since all of the more recent alchemists, since the 16th century, certainly used urine, it would be logical to assume that urine is the best choice of ingredient. But it is also possible they did not publish their experiments in other substances if they found one to greatly decrease the time it takes, since the old alchemists would want to test the dedication of the beginner. For the body, you are looking for a very volatile salt, which can absorb the moisture and break down. The water must contain an abundance of life energy. Both must be pure, containing as little as possible of anything else. It is not necessary that we use only one substance for both, but it has been found that urine supplies both requirements. It would be possible to use the salt of the urine, but the water from another substance. Nevertheless, the safe and sure option is to use urine, and it is the method I will present. For anyone who wishes to try a different substance, it would be wise to make the stone with only urine at the same time and in parallel, so as you do not waste too much of your time if your method fails. To use a different substance, follow the same instructions as I present, only substituting your substance for the urine. The method I present, using only urine, is a relatively new one. It is sometimes called the dry method, due to the calcination in the first part, and made famous among the alchemists by Paracelsus in the 16th century, though it is probably an older method which Paracelsus rediscovered. The older alchemists before Paracelsus used distilled urine and gold, which is less efficient and more expensive than using only urine. It takes more than twice the time as the urine-only method. By the older method, using distilled urine and gold, sometimes called the wet method, one would be relying on the life energy in the distilled urine to break down the gold. This will work because gold is a very pure substance, with a lot of life energy inside it, and will eventually break down with a little convincing from the distilled urine. But it makes much more sense to use the lighter particles from the urine itself, as these are pure, but not so dense and not already determined like gold. Quote, from an open entrance to the closed palace of the king, by an anonymous sage and lover of truth, 1645 AD. Hereof I have now determined to write much, although in the beginning of this book I decreed to bury it in silence. This is the one great sophism of all adepts. Some speak of this common gold and silver, and say the truth, and others say that we cannot use it, and they too say the truth. But in the presence of God I will call all our adepts to account, and charge them with jealous surliness. I too had determined to tread the same path, but God's hand confounded my scheme. I say then that both ways are true, and come to the same thing in the end, but there is a vast difference at the beginning. Quote, from an explanation of the natural philosopher's tincture of Paracelsus, by Alexander von Sochten, 16th century. Theophrastus shews you two ways, one ancient, the other discovered and used by himself, saying the ancients had a very long way before accomplishing the aforesaid separations and achieving their object. In the beginning they, out of a simplex, or also out of a subjectivium like God himself, and also Theophrastus, have made two things, viz. Water and earth. And he continues to say that artists have to these two simplices given the name lily, afterwards using the said simplices and not one. But no, it is indifferent whether you, in the beginning, use one or two things. If our matter is found in one thing, it will equally well be found in two, nature having already converted the original one into two. Now, I wot there is no one who would not wish to know this shorter method, and that you may not have to complain of Theophrastus. He shews you another short way, admonishing you also to let the above tedious process be, and to take from the lion not but his rosy blood, and from the eagle the white gluten. These two bodies you must coagulate together, and bring into one body, as it were male and female seed. Quote, from Aphorisms of Eubigerus, by Barrow Eubigerus, 1690 AD. If you know how to amalgamate our mercury simplex with your common gold, which is dissolved, vivified, and renewed by it, you may be sure of effecting the great elixir, although neither so quick, so natural, nor so rich as you might have done without it. And this is our third way. The amalgamation of our mercury simplex, distilled urine, with common gold consists only in the right proportion, and in the indissoluble union of both, which is done without any external heat in a very short time. This is a lie, it takes a very long time. Without which exact proportion and right union, nothing of any moments is to be expected from their marriage. Know then that this right proportion is 10 parts of our mercury simplex to 1 of your finest common gold in filings, which is dissolved in it, like ice in common water, after an imperceptible manner, and as soon as the dissolution is over, the coagulation and putrefaction presently follow, which effect, if you find not, 'tis a sign that the mercury exceeds its due proportion. Now, When your gold has been thus well amalgamated, united, putrefied, and inseparably digested with our mercury simplex, you will then have only our philosophical sulfur, in which time one might easily have performed the whole work, working without common gold." End quote. Chapter 18. Understanding the Writings. Now that we've covered the theory, I will give you a short glossary to aid you in understanding the alchemical books in case you choose to study them further. You should now have a good idea about the principles of nature, which operate on the development of the stone, and this should be enough to understand the alchemical writings. However, I will help you out by explaining the meaning of the words used by the alchemists. Unfortunately, the alchemists were in the habit of not only using several words for one thing, but also using one word for several things, and different alchemists used each word to mean different things. So you still have to work out the meaning according to the context, which you will be able to do with an understanding of the natural process. Some of the alchemists made up their own words and symbols, so all I can cover here are the commonly used words. The following should not be considered definitions, but merely a rough guide to help you understand some of the ways the alchemists have used these words. Mercury usually represents distilled urine, or the stone itself at any stage of the process, or just urine, more rarely used to represent the white salt. Sulfur usually represents either the white salt or any impure substance not needed, sometimes used to represent the stone at any stage of the process. Alkahest, the stone, red or white. Amalgam, the definition is an alloy. In alchemy, it represents when two things are combined into one, such as the beginning of the second part of the process, or the stone at any stage. Aqua fortis, nitric acid, which is never used in alchemy. Sometimes it can mean the same as mercury. Aqua vitae, living water, same as mercury. Argent vive, same as mercury. Art, alchemy. Body usually represents the white salt, or the stone at any stage, or anything else which makes up the bulk of whatever you're dealing with. Book of nature, the world itself, to learn by experience and observation of nature. Calcine, calcination, to dry, traditionally with strong dry heat, but the alchemists sometimes use it to refer to a drying with gentle heat. Cinnabar, same as mercury. Coagulate, coagulation, a liquid becoming a solid. Conjunction, the joining together of two things, e.g. the white salt and distilled urine. Common, something referred to as common means it's the normal substance, without any metaphor, e.g. common gold. Crow represents the black, putrefaction stage of the process. Dew, same as mercury. Digestion, same as putrefy. Distill, distillation, to evaporate and condense. In alchemy, this is always done with low heat. Dove usually represents the white stone, or sometimes the distilled urine. Eagles represents distillation. Elixir, the stone, white or red. Fermentation, when the white or red stone is mixed with silver or gold respectively. First matter, either urine or the life energy. Gold sometimes represents normal gold, otherwise represents either the red stone or the white salt, or the stone at any part of the process. Great work, the process of making the stone. Hermaphrodite, when the white salt and distilled urine have been combined. Hermetically sealed, an airtight seal. Imbibe, imbibition, to absorb moisture until saturated. King usually represents the red stone. Lead, normal lead, or same as sulfur. lion, a metaphor for something difficult to overcome, or sometimes used to represent the black mass of the urine, which has the white salt inside it. Living, same as hour, also implies the substance contains life energy or has been changed by an alchemical process, e.g. living gold, depending on the context, could represent urine, the white salt, or the stone at any stage. Magnesia, same as mercury. Moon, Luna, feminine principle, usually represents the white stone or the distilled urine, even though some alchemists consider the distilled urine to be the masculine principle. Can also represent silver. Multiplication, when the stone is increased in quantity and/or quality. Of the sages, a word with "of the sages" after it is a clue that the previous word is a metaphor, e.g. Mercury of the sages. Hour, a word with "hour" before it is a clue that the following word is a metaphor, e.g. our Mercury. Pelican, the vessel, not a special vessel as some think, just a normal round one. Philosophical, same as our, e.g. philosophical Mercury. Phoenix, a mythological bird said to live hundreds of years, then die in a ball of fire, from which it is born again from the ashes. This symbol represents nature's process of generation from corruption. All things must be destroyed before they can further develop. This fundamental concept applies to all things, including our stone and our civilization. In alchemy, the symbol usually represents the red stone, or the entire process itself. Projection, when the stone is used to turn metals into silver or gold. Putrefy, putrefaction, breaking down, decomposition. Queen, usually represents the white stone. Quicksilver, same as mercury. Quintessence, usually represents the active principle, what I am calling life energy. Raven, represents the black, putrefaction stage of the process. Rebis, when the white salt and distilled urine have been combined. Salt, usually represents the white salt. Seed, same as common usage, but broader as alchemists insist that everything has a seed. Soul, usually represents the life energy. Spirit, distilled urine. Sublime, sublimation, a solid becoming a liquid or gas. Sun, soul, masculine principle, usually represents the red stone or the white salt, can also represent gold. Tincture, the stone, white or red. Vulcan, Roman god of useful fire. In alchemy, Vulcan's fire is a degree of heat which will cause circulating evaporation and condensation. Vulcan was created as an alchemical symbol. Vulgar, same as common. Water, same as mercury. I will follow with an example. Quote from the Sophic Hydrolith, or Water Stone of the Wise, by Anonymous, 17th century. A spirit is given for a time to the body, and that spirit is the life of a soul. If the spirit draws the soul to itself, they are both severed from the body. Then are there three abiding in the same place, until the precious body is dissolved, and is decomposed, and dies. But after a time the spirit and the soul are brought back by gentle warmth, and hold once more their former seat. Then you have the essence. No perfection is wanting, and the work is glorified by a joyful end. End quote. Translation: the urine contains both water and salt. The life energy is in the water. If the water is distilled, the life energy will go with it. The three, salt, distilled urine, life energy, being put together will break down, putrefy, and turn black. But after a time, the water is brought back with a moist heat, and all combines. Then you have the stone. It is perfect, and the work is glorified by a joyful end. Chapter 19. Overview. Quote, Wu Chen Pian, Essay on the Understanding of Truth, by Chang Po Tuan, 1078 AD, Chinese. The work is easy, and the medicine is not far away. If the secret is disclosed, it will be so simple that everyone may get a good laugh. End quote. There are two parts to our great work. Both parts follow the same laws of nature that we addressed in our theory. Quote from The New Pearl of Great Price by Peter Bonus, 1338 AD. The first operation, which is done by hand, is the first stage of the work, which consists in sublimation and purification. The second operation, in which the artist has nothing to do but look on, is the second stage of the work. End quote. In the first part, we give nature a head start by manually performing some of nature's operations and removing the densest particles so as to accelerate the whole process. If you did not perform this first part, the process would still work, but it may well take longer than your lifetime. We will repeatedly distill with low heat and calcine the urine in order to separate it into layers according to density. We will then take only the lightest and most subtle of the particles, which will be in the form of a white salt, and discard the rest of the body. Then, further distill the urine to make it as pure as possible, so only the lightest particles remain. This leaves us at the end of the first part with a white salt and a well-distilled urine. The first part will take around 3 months. Quote from an anonymous treatise concerning the Philosopher's Stone by Anonymous, 12th to 17th century. By artificial distillation, the spirit can be separated from phlegmatic wateriness and earthy impurity, a residue remaining, from which residue, after calcinations, is extracted a white salt. End quote. In the second part, we combine the salt and distilled urine, hermetically seal them in a vessel of the correct specifications, and let nature do its thing. At this stage, we only need to make sure it is subjected to the correct degree of heat. To combine the salt and distilled urine, we heat gently until the salt absorbs and becomes saturated with the distilled urine, which can take up to 1 year or longer. Then we just need to watch for the matter to putrefy and turn black, then purify and turn white, adjusting the heat accordingly. When the matter turns white, we have the white stone. Quote from A Demonstration of Nature by John A. Mihung, 16th to 17th century. Reduce the matter, which is one, to powder, put it together with its water in a well-closed vessel, and expose it to continuous, gentle heat, which will then begin to operate while the moisture favors the decomposition. End quote. The white stone can then be fermented with silver in order to stabilize it and make it capable of withstanding higher heat. You can think of this as trapping the life energy inside a material body, the silver. The white stone can be subjected to higher heat, which will mature it into the red stone. The red stone must itself be fermented with gold. Quote from the Epistle of Bonus of Ferrara by Peter Bonus, 14th century. Without a proper ferment, the moon cannot become the sun, but the substance, having nothing to prevent it from doing so, will again revert to water. Quote from Compound of Compounds by Albertus Magnus, 13th century. There are no other ferments like these here. The ferment of silver is silver. The ferment of gold is gold. Therefore, don't look elsewhere. End quote. You will then have the Philosopher's Stone. It can be multiplied in quality and quantity by repeating the second part, which will be much quicker, or in other ways as will be discussed. Quote from an explanation of the Natural Philosopher's Tincture of Paracelsus by Alexander von Suchten, 16th century. For our multiplication, according to Raymundus, is naught but the reiteration of the process of our primordial creation. End quote. Chapter 20. Apparatus. Having now covered the theory, we can start with the practical operations for actually making the Philosopher's Stone. You first need to obtain the necessary apparatus. For the first part, you will need 2 500 milliliter retorts for distilling the urine. It is important that this be a retort and not some modern distillation apparatus. The reason for this is that you are only distilling on low heat so as not to destroy the life energy. If you try to use modern distillation apparatus, then the water vapor will not rise high enough to escape before it condenses. The reason for the second retort is because you may have to break the first one in order to extract the white salt, and also because the distilled urine will need to be further distilled in a clean retort before moving on to the second part. You will need a 500 milliliter glass bottle for collecting and storing the distilled urine. For the second part, you will need a round bottom flask in either Keldal, Florence, or boiling flask style. The size you will need will likely be 50 milliliters, depending on how much of the body you will be using. Try to find one with a long neck. You can use one with a shorter neck, but for this, you will have to make sure the ambient room temperature is low enough for the water vapor to condense closer to the heat source. The Keldal flask has an egg-shaped bottom and a long neck, which is perfect for our purpose of imitating the water cycle through evaporation and condensation. But even a normal boiling flask will do the job as long as it has a round bottom. Do not use a flat bottom flask. You will need a pipette for accurately transferring the distilled urine into the flask. You will need stoppers for sealing the flask. For both parts, you will need a water bath with digital temperature control. A water bath is the best heat source since the water is all at an even temperature. The lower part of the flask can be immersed in the water, and the temperature can be adjusted very precisely. Get the smallest one you can. It needs only be large enough for the 500 milliliter retort. You will also need a dry heat source for calcining the retort between distillations. You could do this on a portable gas stove or electric hot plate. The calcining will need to be done outside, so you will not be able to use your kitchen stove. You will need a triangle support stand with the clamp attachments for holding the retort or flask in place over the water bath. If you can afford it, get 2 or more of everything, just in case. It's also a good idea to get a collection of various bottles, spatulas, stoppers, dishes, mortar and pestle, and other fun things like that, which are not absolutely necessary, but will certainly be very useful. Otherwise, you'll have to improvise with what you can find in the kitchen. The glassware, retort, and flask should be made of borosilicate glass, which is pretty much standard these days, so it should not be much trouble to find. Borosilicate glass can stand very high heat without cracking. If you buy the water bath or other electrical items from abroad, be sure to check it works on the same voltage as in your country. If not, you will need to buy a voltage converter as well. If you plug a 110 volt appliance into a 220 volt supply, you could end up burning down your house, so do pay attention to this. The water bath will need to be running 24/7, so if you live in an area with frequent power cuts, I recommend getting a backup generator. Checklist. Minimum. 1. 2 times retort, 500 milliliter. 2. Glass bottle, 500 milliliter. 3. Round bottom flask, 50 milliliter. 4. Pipette. 5. Stoppers. 6. Water bath. 7. portable stove. 8. Triangle stand. The following quote is a description of the vessel to be used for the second part of the work. Quote from The Root of the World by Roger Bacon, 13th century. The vessel for our stone is but one, in which the whole magistry or elixir is performed and perfected. This is a curcubit, whose bottom is round like an egg, or an urinal, smooth within, that it may ascend and descend the more easily, covered with a limbeck, round and smooth everywhere, and not very high, and whose bottom is round also like an egg. Its largeness ought to be such that the medicine or matter may not fill above a fourth part of it, made of strong durable glass, clear and transparent, that you may see through it all the colors appertaining to and appearing in the work, in which the spirit moving continually cannot pass or fly away. Let it also be closed, that as nothing can go out of it, so nothing can enter it. And though the philosophers oftentimes say that the matter is to be put into the vessel and closed up fast, yet it is sufficient for the operator once to put the said matter in, once to close it up, and so to keep it even to the very perfection and finishing of the work. End quote.